Hey, listen, bro. Niggas ain't saying, man, that nigga there, woo, woo, woo. And his brother go shoot at us. That nigga brother pull a gun out on Big U, nigga.
Did you ever hear a story that starts with a whisper and ends with a scream? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a clip so shocking, it's rewriting the whole saga of Big U, his son Jabari Henley, and the unexpected turn that landed Blacc Sam right in the frame, though he never knew the camera was watching. Strap in, because what you're about to see could change everything we thought we knew about that night on Halloween, and the hidden footage that finally exposed the truth behind the chaos. Stay tuned as we break it down piece by piece. Yup, that's right. The story that's about to unfold is the kind that stitches together a decade of raw violence, betrayal, and the brutal reality of living in South Los Angeles. At the heart of it is a grainy clip that re-emerged on social media, a chilling reminder of a hit on the night of Halloween that ripped through the neighborhood like a knife. It all began on a crisp October evening in 2025 when an old Instagram live clip resurfaced. In that clip, Big U, Nipsey Hussle, and little Jabari Henley were all together at the same corner of South Figueroa and West 69th. Smiling, joking, singing the praises of a brother they all claim to love. But the clip became the catalyst that pulled a long-mired conspiracy loose in the streets. To understand the fallout, we need to look back to the people in that frame. Nipsey Hussle, whose real name was Niperio Nip KD Hussle, was a charismatic figure in the Los Angeles rap scene. He grew up in the Rollin' 60s neighborhood, a place dominated by the Crips who had carved out their own territory in the back alleys of South LA. From a young age, he was a hustler, a dreamer, and a visionary who built an independent record label, turning raw talent into gold. He was a mentor to many, a mother figure to a community that saw him as an icon of Black entrepreneurship. When the police finally caught Eric Holder Jr. and found him guilty of murder, they made it clear that the killing of Nippy was the result of personal vendetta, not a hit orchestrated from the shadows. Big U, born Urban U.D. Henley, was the younger brother of the famed record executive Big B. He came from a family that had long been entrenched in the music business and in the street culture of South LA. The Henley family name carried weight. Big U was a pillar of the community, a benefactor, a mentor, and to his son, Jabari, he was the epitome of a father who could guide his child to greatness. But the streets began to whisper that Big U had betrayed Nippy in 2019, and that betrayal would haunt him for years. Jabari Henley, the son of Big U, was the third figure in this tale. He was a young man, barely out of his teens, a man who had been raised in a neighborhood that had known violence all his life. He was a loyal son, but the blood in his veins made him a target. He had grown up watching Nipsey Hussle on a local television show, a show that highlighted his brother's rise to prominence. And as a boy, he had stared up at the stars at night, hoping one day to escape the inevitable. Fast forward to October 2025, a piece of footage that had seemed innocuous at first glance became a storm. The clip was recorded during a live Instagram session in late October. Someone behind the camera said, "Justice for Nip," while Big U's laughter, whether nervous, flippant, or misread, was captured. In the digital age, context is rarely honored. That laugh became a symbol in the streets, a sign that Big U had something to do with Nippy's death. Even though the case of Nippy's murder had been adjudicated with the conviction of Eric Holder Jr. on a personal snitch-based motive, the narrative of betrayal persisted. People wanted to blame someone, and the story that Big U was the conspirator fit the narrative. During the same period, Big U was already a target for a federal RICO indictment that charged him with an elaborate racketeering scheme. The indictment was filed by the United States Attorney's Office in March 2025. It detailed a decades-long criminal organization involving multiple violent crimes, extortion, and murders. The charges included an alleged role in the murder of Nipsey Hussle and the hit that killed him in 2019. The RICO charges had become the loudest in the court of public opinion, far more powerful than the actual evidence that had proven otherwise. And while Big U tried to defend himself, he was forced to represent himself, as his legal counsel had been dismissed in 2025. His situation was precarious, alone against the full might of the federal government. In the months that followed, the community was left with a raw wound. In 2025, Halloween night arrived. It was the same night when Nipsey Hussle had been murdered in 2019. The streets of South Los Angeles were still unforgiving, and the night was filled with the smell of incense and cigarette smoke from a small shop called Fig and 69 Smoke Spot. This was a place that locals frequented for a quick energy drink, lottery ticket, or a moment of escape. It was a place where the lives of the neighborhood intersected with violence, but it was also a business run by a small independent owner, one who did not carry a gang affiliation. The murder itself unfolded near 11:11 p.m. The night was filled with a quiet stillness, punctuated by a sedan, most likely a Toyota Camry or Honda Accord, pulling up. Jabari walked towards the vehicle, and for a few tense seconds, the conversation in the passenger side window was all that could be heard. Then, in a flash of 9mm rounds that echoed off buildings, the sedan exploded into a hail of bullets. 7 rounds hit the body, 4 of which struck him with devastating precision. The sound of gunfire shattered the calm of Halloween night. Jabari collapsed, clutching his side, as the sedan drove off the curb and vanished into the maze of South LA streets. The police and emergency services were able to get to the scene only minutes later.
He wanted to leave a bad deal that he'd got into with Big U's unique label.
So I signed him to it. It was signed to a 10-year production contract. It started in.
The paramedics started CPR and administered epinephrine. The injury was catastrophic. He was pronounced dead at the scene, his blood spilling onto the pavement, his body a stark reminder of the brutal reality of this city. The Los Angeles County coroner later confirmed the cause of death as homicide, with hemorrhagic shock and a lacerated pulmonary artery as contributing factors. Toxicology tests came back negative for alcohol or drugs, indicating that the murder was not a drunken brawl or a misstep, but about a name that made someone a target. The story spread through the community, the streets, and the internet. Many people celebrated the justice that was finally being served, but others saw a deeper cycle of violence that had been perpetuated over years. In the meantime, Big U was in his bed at the Metropolitan Detention Center, unaware of the night that had been tearing apart his world. His wife and his son had fallen into the same tragedy that had once plagued Nippy. And in the streets, the blood was still spilling, the violence still rising. A man who had long been seen as a benefactor was suddenly a target, a scapegoat for those who had once been his allies. The story that emerged from all of this is a portrait of a city where a name can become a death sentence. The streets of South LA are a battlefield, and the families that grow there are either fighting for their survival or, sometimes, the very life of someone else. The cycle of violence has no end. Each generation learns to live with the fear that tomorrow will bring another loss. The question that remains is whether the community can break out of this cycle, or whether the cycle will continue to keep us stuck in a loop of betrayal, revenge, and endless loss. It is a story that keeps us awake at night, one that we see in the faces of the young men who walk the same streets every day. The streets that once seemed full of opportunity have become a battlefield where power is gained through blood. And as the story goes, no matter how many times we try to rewrite history, the memories of those lost are still haunting the present. The night was turned from a celebration of a season to a horror of violence, and the streets of South Los Angeles remained forever scarred by the echoes of those bullets. The cycle of violence and betrayal continues, and the story reminds us that the only way to break the cycle is to find a new narrative, one that doesn't revolve around the name, but around hope, healing, and real change. The phone buzzed again, a new call that sliced through the dimly lit confinement of the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The caller, voice muffled by the wall, whispered, "Luce, you got a new piece. Big U's son is dead. They're celebrating it out there." That second shock compounded the ache already pulsing through the sterile cell where Big U sat, his eyes hollow with grief. Every crack of the concrete seemed to echo with the weight of a name, a lineage, a story that twisted through generations like a serpent. Inside the cell, Big U's mind tried to separate the physical loss of his son from the digital spectacle that had erupted across the city. He had lost the son he loved most, Jabari Henley, a name that was both a son's and a brand, a tag that carried more than a mere identity. It was a narrative that had been built on decades of conflict, on a legacy that had been shattered by the very people he had once allied with. The internet had taken a piece of that legacy, turning it into a rallying cry for retribution. It felt as if the world had turned Jabari's funeral into a street parade. By 2 a.m., the city's social media feeds were a cacophony of images and text. Hundreds of posts glorified the killing. They painted the event as a moral victory, a karmic retribution that honored the late Nippy, an artist who had sought to break the cycle of violence. Those that had come to grief, family members of Jabari, friends, colleagues, were shrouded in doxing and harrowing content. Dozens of accounts were flagged, a few suspended, yet the footage and addresses had already been disseminated far and wide. The net was wide enough to catch both the innocent bystanders who wanted to know what had happened, and the very people who might know the killers. It was a digital war zone that threatened to derail the investigation.
Detectives on the ground had to sift through thousands of posts that made no sense to a police report. The 22% uptick in anonymous tips to Crime Stoppers came with a flurry of chatter about old beef, about Nippy's 2019 shooting, about an alleged revenge that was a century old. The police were left with a mountain of speculation and a handful of genuine leads. They had to separate the noise from the truth. That's why ballistics analysis became a priority. They were waiting for the comparison of the bullets recovered from the scene to the weapons used in the 2019 shooting, to see if they matched the known suspect. The ballistics lab had a lead on a certain type of semi-automatic that only a few street guns could match. The cell that held Big U was not a quiet place of reflection. Even as his eyes flicked from one side of the concrete wall to the other, he could feel the roar of the outside world in his bones. The words of his fellow artists who had once clashed with him began to echo in his mind. Blacc Sam's post on Mara Records' Instagram: "Pain multiplies pain. Honor Nip with peace, not this." The call for peace rang louder than the call for vengeance. Yet the internet seemed to tilt in the opposite direction. A post from a known affiliate of Nippy's estate, a voice that should have understood the tragedy, was drowned by thousands of other voices that celebrated the killing. The numbers were stark. 62% of the analyzed posts invoked Nippy's name, while only 28% offered condolences, and a mere 10% condemned the mockery. The digital environment was skewed toward a narrative that had already lost its foundation.
By bringing DJ Khaled to the 60s hood and not asking permission. They were there to shoot a music video for Khaled's song Higher that featured Nipsey and John Legend. Allegedly, Big U sent Rollin' 60s members to the shoot to cause trouble, causing Nipsey and Khaled to have to...
The environment outside the correctional center was no less tense. In November 6, 2025, the city remained a tinderbox of potential violence. Every corner of South Los Angeles was a scene that might erupt into a shooting, and the memory of past events lingered like an invisible hand. Some observers noted that the timing of the murder, in the midst of already heightened tensions across Los Angeles, was a dangerous coincidence. The city was already seeing numerous other shootings, some linked to rival gang activity, others tied to the same generational history of certain sets. The environment was a breeding ground for retribution. A single incident could spark a chain reaction that might ignite further violence. The investigation stayed open and active. Detective Maria Rodriguez of the LAPD's Homicide Squad had spent countless hours reviewing the new surveillance footage that had come to light. Her eyes had learned to differentiate the blurred images that showed a black SUV pulling into a curb from the clear image that captured the moment Jabari walked into a smoke shop. Each frame was a potential puzzle piece. While ballistics matched the particular caliber of gun to the murder, the forensic team still lacked a definitive link between a suspect and the crime scene. The suspect could have been a low-level gunman who had no knowledge of the history, or he could have been part of an orchestrated retaliation. In either case, the presence of an Instagram account that had posted a shaky video of the victim's home was a stark reminder of how quickly digital data could be weaponized. Meanwhile, the conversation in social media channels remained polarized. The platforms attempted to correct the situation, suspending 15 accounts for doxing and demonetizing 200 TikTok videos for graphic content. But the damage was already done.
The footage continued to circulate, and the public perception had already solidified. Jabari Henley was the victim, and Big U's son was a symbol of a larger narrative. The online crowd had already built a narrative that would have lasted for years, if not decades, in the absence of a swift and decisive legal response. The police had to balance the need to keep the community safe while still gathering reliable information. In a city that was already experiencing a spike in violent crime, the potential for another retaliation was real. For Big U, the cell became a place of meditation. He tried to keep his thoughts grounded, focusing on the words of the Bible that were brought to him. The words of the pastor were a balm, but they did not soothe the pain of losing a child, nor did it ease the weight of a world that seemed to judge him by his son's actions. He remembered the last moments of his son. He pictured Jabari walking toward a smoke shop, a small but ordinary act that in the context of the hood seemed to seal his fate. He remembered that the same smoke shop had been the backdrop for other violent incidents in the past. He understood how in that neighborhood, a name could become a target independent of the person's choices. The community began to rally. Blacc Sam posted a heartfelt message urging peace, while others tried to calm the situation. But the internet had already turned into a battlefield, where the conversation was no longer about solving a crime, but about a narrative that had already been decided. The police had to address this. They had to find a way to use the technology that had amplified the rumors to find the truth. Within the weeks that followed, LAPD's detectives continued to analyze the footage. They interviewed potential witnesses who might have seen the person who pulled the trigger. Some of those witnesses were reluctant, not because they were unwilling to help, but because they feared being associated with a killer due to the street politics that ran in the city. The sense that a name could be used against them, especially if it was linked to a high-profile artist, was a chilling reminder of how the community was still living in a world where violence was the norm. The city's response to the murder was complex. The law enforcement and the community were trying to rebuild trust in a city that was already saturated with violence. The conversation turned to the role of artists in the community, how they could use their platform to bring a sense of justice or to create a sense of peace. They began to hold community forums that addressed the larger conversation about the legacy of the late Nippy. There was a discussion about how the city could handle a crime that was amplified by the internet, how they could use the data that have been spread widely to solve the crime. A balance had to be struck between the digital world and the legal process. Despite the many investigations, by November 6, 2025, no arrests had been made. The case had become a long, drawn-out quest. The ballistics evidence was still being analyzed for a match, but the suspect still remained a mystery. The city had seen a lot of violent crimes, but the murder had not received the same attention. The community had not found an answer. The call for peace still rang in the background. It was still possible for a solution to emerge. The detectives kept an open mind.
They realized that the city's social media feeds were a goldmine for information if the data was collected carefully and used appropriately. The law enforcement had to keep the conversation moving toward a positive direction. The next step for the city was to focus on the truth. They had to bring the killer to justice in order to show that the community was not in a place of perpetual violence. They had to remember that the past could not dictate the future. The fight for peace was still ahead, but the digital world was not the only thing that mattered. It was time for a collective effort that would lead to a better future for the city, one where a name would no longer carry the weight of revenge. The community was working to build a better world. The call for peace was the first step toward that. The city still hummed with the memory of that night, its streets whispering about a gunshot that had fractured both a family and a community. In the wake of the tragedy, the echo of the blast stretched beyond the physical wound, reverberating through every tweet, meme, and midnight livestream that had been shared across Los Angeles.
One of the co-defendants in the upcoming case actually revealed on No Jumper that Big U had told him Nipsey was dead before it even happened, with Loose Cannon saying that Big U had prior knowledge of Nipsey's death before it all went down, mentioning it on the phone to him, which led.
The murder of the young son of a prominent figure had become a story that could not be contained in any single frame. It was a narrative that the digital realm had amplified, turning the grief of a family into a public forum of speculation, suspicion, and, for many, a call for justice. Detectives on the scene had already begun to sift through the endless stream of data that had surfaced in the days that followed. The initial footage that captured the moment of death was only the beginning. It was a snapshot in a vast sea of information that seemed to demand answers, yet offered no concrete clues. To extract meaning from the chaos, investigators turned to a methodical approach that combined traditional forensic science with a modern data-driven strategy. Every post that mentioned the name, every clip that contained a background flash of the same alley, and every geotagged photo that showed a shadowy figure were logged into a secure database. Analysts used facial recognition algorithms, voice pattern matching, and cross-referencing tools to create a mosaic of potential suspects, motives, and timelines. The technology that had once seemed like a threat became, paradoxically, the city's most powerful ally in piecing together the truth. Simultaneously, the community's response unfolded in a different arena, the public square of conversation. Artists whose influence stretched across neighborhoods and beyond stepped onto the stage with open minds and earnest hearts. They organized forums and listening sessions that ran late into the night, inviting residents, local musicians, activists, and even those who had once spoken sharply against each other. In these spaces, stories were shared, stories that painted a more nuanced portrait of the city's underlying fractures, gang affiliations, systemic inequities, and the often hidden trauma that fed into violence. Through these dialogues, a collective voice began to emerge, one that insisted on a future where justice could coexist with healing. The forums were not just about finding a killer. They were about restoring trust, bridging divides, and redefining what it meant to live safely in a city that had long been haunted by the shadows of gunfire. It was within these conversations that a name began to surface: Blacc Sam, a rising artist who had become known for his sharp social commentary and unapologetic authenticity. Rumors had swirled that he was somehow connected to the incident, a suspicion fueled by a clip that showed him walking past the scene in the hours before the tragedy. However, the footage, upon closer examination, revealed an unrelated presence, a passerby caught in the background. Yet the narrative had already been set, and the power of viral content ensured that the rumor continued to spread like wildfire. The detectives, aware of the risk of mislabeling an innocent individual, requested that any evidence implicating Blacc Sam be verified with the highest standards of scrutiny. Meanwhile, the artist himself found himself at the center of a storm he had not prepared for, his every move watched and analyzed in a digital age where privacy and truth are in constant negotiation. The community's trust in law enforcement, already fragile, faced a new test. Detectives needed to prove that the investigative process was both transparent and accountable. To that end, they opened a portal where the public could view the evidence in real time, see the progress of ballistics reports, and follow the steps taken to protect the privacy of potential witnesses. This transparency was a deliberate attempt to turn the city's skepticism into partnership. By inviting citizens into the fold, the police aimed to show that the pursuit of truth was not a solitary endeavor, but a collaborative one that required the input and vigilance of every resident. The digital world, while a source of amplification for rumors, also offered unprecedented avenues for truth-seeking. Data scientists within the department developed a custom analytics platform that scoured millions of posts for patterns and anomalies. They identified a particular hashtag that had gained traction days after the murder, one that trended alongside discussions of street safety, gun control, and the influence of music on youth. By mapping the usage of this hashtag over time and across geographies, the detectives uncovered a cluster of users whose posts contained references to the location, the time of day, and even a description that matched the weapon used in the murder. While no single piece of evidence could definitively point to a suspect, the convergence of digital footprints built a compelling narrative of who was present, who was involved, and why. During the same period, ballistics analysis revealed that the weapon recovered from the scene was a model commonly used in the area but rarely sold through legal channels. The forensic team compared the cartridge casings with a database of known gun-related crimes in the city, noting a striking similarity with a series of shootings that had occurred over the past year. Though the weapon had no direct link to any known offender, the pattern suggested that whoever had used it was connected to a larger network of illicit firearms circulation. The detectives reached out to the FBI's firearms division for assistance, knowing that the resolution of this case required resources that extended beyond the city's borders. Amid the investigative grind, a new thread began to unravel that seemed to bring the story full circle.
A local resident, who had been reluctant to speak with police for fear of being accused or becoming a scapegoat, was persuaded to share a video she had recorded from her balcony that night. The footage, taken in a different angle, captured a shadow that moved across the alley in a rhythm that matched the gunfire's cadence. When overlaid with the forensic timeline, this new evidence aligned perfectly with the suspect that had previously been overlooked, a low-profile individual who had been a background figure in many of the online rumors but had never been brought to the police's attention.